Hi, hello. We are back with more seasonal anime reviews, this time looking at the spring 2021 season. An absolute banger of a season. So many good shows. Seasonal anime is like really good right now, and I was really excited to talk about these. First, of course, though, our obligatory stuff that I didn't watch section. Fumetsu no Anata E. I watched the first episode of this, and it seemed kind of interesting, a good setup for like an adventurous shonen series. Kind of gloomy, but I assume it gets a little less gloomy than the first episode. It seemed alright, but the production was such that I thought I would rather just read the manga, and in all honesty, I really ought to just read the A Silent Voice manga, finally get around to that. But it seemed fine. Nagatoro-san, I watched the first episode and it was like whatever, a solid adaptation I guess, but not that interesting given that I already read the manga. I was really disappointed though at the lack of discourse around this show. I thought there would be at least one Twitter thread where someone finds out the origin of the Nagatoro character and what Nanashi made before he made Nagatoro, and that there would be a huge shitstorm and like a million replies and people evoking all sorts of arguments about cultural differences and not to kink shame, and it would have just been a delight for me to see that sort of argument. But it feels like all the discourse energy got used up by that one psychopath who was mad that Nagatoro said sus in the official subtitles and went on like a 5,000 tweet rant that suddenly devolved into every kind of regressive take in the book. And after that, it kind of seemed like nobody wanted to talk about the show, positive or negative, just because it had that overwhelming association. So, very disappointing. We never got to see anybody try to cancel Nanashi, which would have been, again, absolutely hilarious. Slime Killing for 300 Years, I watched the first episode again. It was fine. It was serviceable. It was an adaptation. I would rather just read the manga, as I have been, but it's probably fine. The Doga Kobo harem thing, I don't even remember the name of this. I watched the first episode and I thought it was really stupid, and I just hated every character and I hated the premise, and I just asked myself, do I really want to watch this just for the sake of Dogo Kobo animation? I call them Dogo Kobo, it's Doga Kobo. That's how little I care about this show. Even Doga Kobo animation could not save this show for me. So, no Doga Kobo show this season, alas, but I'm not going to watch this shit. Megalobox 2, I talked about this in the preview video, but I gave up on Megalobox 1, even though it was really good in every way, and I'm a fan of Tomorrow's Joe, and I thought it was, a worthy successor of Tomorrow's Joe. But I don't know, I lost interest, and thus I didn't watch this either, but maybe someday. Bakuten, a friend of mine watched, and she said it was really good and really well produced and really fun. Made me want to watch it, but at that point I was already watching 8 shows. Didn't seem feasible, but maybe at some point, if I ever lose my addiction to seasonal anime, if I ever step off the endless seasonal treadmill, I'll go back to a show like this. Haha, just kidding, that will never happen. Seasonal anime will dominate my life forever, hahaha. Dynazenon I'm watching now. We were rewatching Gridman in my anime watching club, first to kind of set up Dynazenon, and now we're watching Dynazenon, and it's great so far. I'm really excited for it. So I think this will just show up in the summer anime reviews video. The Wonder Egg special. If you're watching this hoping to see me talk about the Wonder Egg special and maybe get really emotional about it, I'm saving myself. I'm going to delay that. I haven't watched it yet. I'm going to watch it later this week with the anime watching club. I'm bracing for the worst, but maybe some tiny part of me still holds hope for it not to be stupid. But I think that'll get a separate video on its own, maybe. But we've got enough stuff to talk about. We got 8 shows, all of which I liked, that I would love to break down for you. Starting with Vivy, Flouride Eyes Song. This is the one, if you can remember in the preview video, I got really upset because it was only 23rd in popularity, and it's by Studio Wit, who in many ways is the most famous anime studio right now, because of Attack on Titan. Certainly the most popular with a certain demographic, which I thought would also really appreciate Vivy, and I went on this whole rant about why are anime watchers so lazy, why does nobody do research. I'm not going to replicate it right now, we don't have time. But sure enough, it went all the way up to number 6 in popularity. Why don't people do any sort of research? They could have known about this show before it was halfway over. But I think because I had this like super self-righteousness about it, I convinced myself that this would be some sort of masterpiece on the tier of The Great Pretender or on the tier of Rolling Girls. Instead, it's just all right. I don't know. I was a little disappointed. It's just all right. Plot is really extremely ambitious. I will always respect that. They really went for it. It's at once a time travel story, a development of AI story, and an idol show. It's also just about a robot that sings and dances. There's these semi-episodic adventures that have these, every one of them kind of riffs on all of these major themes, a different perspective on all of these 3 core elements. Also deals with themes of performance, camaraderie, self-actualization, love, causality. Some pretty major things. You might think, geez, that's a lot to cover in any sort of depth, and you're right. They don't really cover much of this in any sort of depth. Essentially, I would say it's a series of intriguing questions, but kind of dissatisfying answers. The time-leaping setting, where, this is, I guess, a minor spoiler, all of these adventures take place sometimes decades apart from the previous one. And each time there's a lot of exposition that needs to happen to kind of situate you in this new era of even further in the future and what's going on and what's the crisis. And this, I think, could be really exciting, this sort of rapid getting up to speed and disorientation around what the world is like. But now it's usually more of like a deflating disorientation where things aren't never really that different or that crazy. Instead, it's just kind of like, oh, that's it. Oh, they're doing, like a music festival. Okay. And this really intense blitz-like pacing leaves you not a whole lot of time to connect with the characters. And even by the end of the series, I kind of had a sense, like a character would come back and I'd just be like, okay. Like, there wasn't enough time to really build up a connection, a sense of looking forward to seeing someone again in a new era or anything like that. And there was some pretty cool Sakuga with Studio, of course, absolutely legendary for their action scenes, but in a pretty limited capacity. There were great fight scenes, great explosions, but they were just fight scenes and just explosions. They were very down-to-earth kind of action movie style. Instead of something like Rolling Girls, I think is the pinnacle, that it's just insane choreography, explosive kaleidoscopic colors, explosions that look like flowers and fireworks, and just so much creativity in all of these choices, whereas here, much more just kind of depicting real fights in the real world, just kind of disappointing. The performance scenes where Vivy is singing and dancing and stuff were a little bit more creative. Oh, what? Why you meowers? But they still lacked quite a lot of dynamicism. I think they could have gone way, way, way further. They could have broken free of kind of the realism entirely and done something truly creative. It just doesn't seem like it lives up to their potential as a studio. Oh, what's up? Well, you want to talk about anime too? Oh, kitty. You want a little scratch? Okay. I just thought because of the setting that it's like exploding into the far future and there's super advanced AIs and stuff that they could just go completely wild. And instead it was very restrained and very aesthetically samey. Yeah, just gritty sci-fi stuff, pretty default direction. The one thing that they did do pretty often, which was a bold choice, and I respect it on the level of it being a bold choice, is that they would kind of use this like realism to the face for these like close-ups, which kind of landed some nice impact in the overall direction, but they just kind of looked weird to me. Like I never really got into them. Okay, but enough complaining. There were some aspects of this that I did really, really like. The character of Matsumoto was really great. Her assistant from the future. They just had really hilarious banter. Their personalities contrasted in a really fun way. And it was a fun way to do exposition dump. Because as I said, each arc required tons and tons of exposition. But hearing Matsumoto rapid fire all of it out, I think was a very clever design that really highlighted his character without taking up very much time. Some of the quests were pretty satisfying, especially, I don't want to spoil too much, but whenever they really subverted your expectations for the core premise, the core kind of story elements, I was pretty impressed. Like, I was shocked by some stuff. Even if the more I thought about it, the more it seemed more like a plot hole than a twist. The impact was really good. And the variety of plots and settings was pretty neat. Even though they didn't go too wild, they did tackle quite a few different subjects to some amount of depth. And it felt like a good kind of like an anthology type series, a la The Twilight Zone, or I guess to not sound like a boomer, I should say Black Mirror, where they just kind of look at these questions of AI and of predestination and of time travel and stuff and speculate a little bit, which was neat. But again, by the end of the arc, they often homogenized into a somewhat generic action fight scene, explosion, race, fly around type thing. Everything had this really nice aura of doom, of inevitability, of powerlessness and futility. I like stuff like that. I like that most of it was very somber and just kind of bleak, because I'm a freak. I really think this could have been 2 core. I think if like all of the arcs were twice as long, they had time to really establish the characters so that like the tragedy hit deeper, more time to really discuss these interesting questions they were raising. It could have been a really, really good show, but everything was so rushed because studios refuse to do 2 cores for original properties these days, which is really sad. Kitty is trying to get at a box of blueberries I left out, but he cannot puzzle out the complex opening mechanism. Poor Kitty. So, I think overall, a solid show, but kind of annoyingly disappointing and annoyingly written at times. So I would give it an 8. It's a solid 8. Next, we're going to talk about Mini Dora. These are just some preview shorts. I think they're only like 2 minutes long for the 2nd season of Maid Dragon, which is coming next season, starting soon. Can't wait. And it's basically what you expect. Oh, hey, Kitty. The little slices of life, a small gag or two, and a little sentimental, heartfelt message by the end, usually. It does a good job reintroducing the characters, their relationships, kind of the main schema of the series. The pacing, I think, is really, really good, that even within 2 minutes, they can do some running gags, some variations, and some payoffs. And it just has like a really good kind of sitcom-y timing, just as the original show does, all just compressed down into 1 2-minute package. It's very light on degeneracy. I don't think there's like any fan service. As far as I can remember, there is no implication of fetishes or weirdness. They're trying to trick people again. They're trying to show the normies this wholesome, well-animated show and trick them. And I always support tricking the normies, so that's a win in my book. The animation is, of course, just absolutely sublime. KyoAni is KyoAni. They never miss a beat. It's just this wonderful, rich combination of lovely, drawn-out, slice-of-life moments with calming, relaxing background, and then really tightly impacted gag comedy, which is perfect. The only downside of the only terrible part was the really weird CGI openings that look super creepy. But the ending, though, I think was fantastic. Every time I saw it, I just had this really warm, joyful feeling that they really captured, I think, just the thrill of discovery in playing old video games when you're a kid, and kind of tying that feeling into the feeling of excitement and discovery of the new season coming soon. I don't know how to score a show like this. Like, on the one hand, it's perfect. It does everything right. It carries forward all the things I like about the original. But this is kind of too easy. Like, what makes Slice of Life really excellent is in how they construct the entire episode, how they construct arcs across episodes. Pacing on a 22-minute scale is much more difficult than on a 2-minute scale. So it's not like you can really call this like a masterpiece or something. This is like it's kind of free. If they can animate this well and they have these characters available to them, this sort of show they can just generate the way I can generate pictures using AI. But I'm really looking forward to season 2. It's gonna be insane. Nagatoro let me down, but this show can deliver the discourse. I believe. Okay. So this, I forgot to animate it, but it's a 9. Like, I think that's fair, because it doesn't do anything wrong. It's just a pretty much perfect show. But I wouldn't call it ambitious or anything either. Okay. Oh, I animated it going away. Oops! I meant to animate this later, too. Oh my gosh. It's an amateur hour over here. So the first, I was going to introduce this idea of a slice of life alignment chart. First, I was going to show, your traditional 4-panel compass. Our axes are between Genki and melancholy. Is it bright and cheerful, or is it kind of gloomy and slow-paced? Is there a character focus, or is it the interest, the hobby focus? And then my big revelation, of course, is that this show is right smack dab in the middle. But of course, I forgot to animate that later than the other stuff, so whatever. So this is Let's Make a Mug 2. It's about making ceramics. And the center zone of that slice of life graph, I realize, is actually where a lot of my all-time favorites reside. I think this show captures some of the reasons why. There's a good sense of realism to it. That it's not just kind of like a magical world, but characters have limitations, there are disappointments. There's sentimentality, there's loss, and this show captures that quite nicely. But then all of this is counterbalanced by the characters always being optimistic, always being positive, and kind of like pushing through these struggles and stuff. I really kind of like that message in series. I really kind of like the feeling of achieving and overcoming. This show does have some depth on ceramics, on making pottery. But it's always very situated in characterization, that you're kind of learning about the characters through them making pottery, rather than learning about pottery as just the entire thing, as just the point of the series. I would have liked more about the technical process. I'm really interested in pottery. I'd like to make pottery myself sometime, so I wanted to learn about it. But it was enough that I could kind of recognize their creative process. I was invested in, this aspect is easy, this aspect is hard. This was like a big achievement for this character, and that's the important part. Even, I can just read Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia, to learn about pottery if I really want to. The risk, though, of aiming for this center spot, where you don't go to any extreme on the alignment chart, is that it can be pretty unmemorable, and I guess that's the downside of this show here. Everything is very standard, all the character archetypes are what you would expect, all of the production choices are very straightforward and unambitious. Not bad, but not good either. It's solid and fine, but outside of the big revelation scenes, the big climaxes, there's nothing really that moving. It's just sort of on. You're just kind of enjoying it, but not, eliciting any super strong emotions. The mood was just never very extreme. I never felt very immersed. I think part of that is that this is only a half-length show. It's only like 10 minutes long per episode. So there isn't much time to kind of emotionally structure things, that you get a big emotional payoff at the end of each episode. It's more just that they have to do kind of a collection of scenes and maybe one kind of revelation. But it's fine. There's some really nice moments, but nothing fantastic. But I really appreciate watching shows like this, because I always walk away knowing a bit more about the hobby that they're depicting. It's always just kind of a soothing, relaxing time that I don't mind. And it also really helps me appreciate when something in Slice of Life does something special. Like, on paper, a show like this and Yuru Camp aren't really that different. But if you watch enough mediocre Slice of Life, you can really appreciate the masterpiece that is something like Yuru Camp. So, this was a really nice scene. This was in an early episode where they talk about different types of traditional ceramics across Japan. I really like that. I wish there was more stuff like that in the series. But I'd give it a 7.5. It's alright. Okay, so we established our Slice of Life alignment chart. This next show we're going to talk about, Super Cub, is in a very interesting position, one that I don't think I'd ever seen a show occupy before. It is down here in this corner of extreme melancholy and extreme interest focus. So Super Cub is essentially just an extended ad for Honda's Super Cub motorbike. It's sponsored by Honda. Honda's name appears in the credits. Honda had to issue disclaimers about certain ways the characters used the Super Cub in the show. And as you might expect from a Super Cub advertisement, this gloomy girl gets a Super Cub, and her world changes forever. You probably think, she cheers right up. She joins the motorbike club. There's 3 to 4 other girls. They go on adventures. They go to the beach. Maybe at the cultural festival, they got to do bike club, bike Christmas, bike New Year's, right? That's how slice of life shows work, right? Nah, this one just stays gloomy. It's really interesting. It's just this awkward melancholy of fits and starts, really low-key adventures, and lots and lots and lots of failure. Just characters being defeated and having setbacks and everything being really hard and requiring lots of steps and reevaluation. Very, very slowly, I guess this is spoilers, but she eventually makes one friend. And then finally, like right near the end, she makes a second friend. Whereas, usually in these series, by the end of episode 1, you've kind of established your group. Everything just has this weird, tense, desaturated, stiff energy. There's basically no animation breaks. It's the type of show that I'd say could have just been live action. Like, there's no like background shifts or animation style shifts or anything like that. The anti-Shaft show. We'll talk about Shaft shows later, but this is on the polar opposite end of the spectrum. Very, very occasionally, there'll be this effect where everything will bloom into light, like the first time she starts her Super Cup, and it's pretty moving. It's pretty beautiful. But then very quickly, it just goes back to normal. And to be clear, this is all fantastic. I think this is really cool that they made the show like this. I never thought a show, especially one that is so obviously trying to promote a particular product, would ever be like this. And I'm just really amazed, really impressed with the atmosphere they're able to cultivate. I'm so impressed by the first few episodes. But the only bad stuff is that they weren't content with just this gloomy story about a girl slowly pottering around on her motorbike and buying parts and having stuff break. Sometimes there are extremely bizarre, very melodramatic, like, crises that happen. And these are weird because not only is, like, the kind of action-packedness, the feeling of urgency so out of place and so awkward, but even at the end, when they're, like, happy and celebrating, it feels awkward and really unnatural. Like it feels like the characters just aren't suited for that kind of happiness. And it really made me rethink the series. That at some point, it kind of clicked that maybe this isn't, like, this expertly produced depiction of melancholy, but an extremely awkward depiction of everything that kind of leads to this inherent melancholy just from, like, stuff not quite executing the way it ought to, if that makes sense. I don't know if I can explain this very well without you just watching the show. But, like, if you just kind of think of a typical slice of life, like, B-roll, where they're just showing stuff happening around the school, people talking, setting the mood, setting the climate. In this one, it feels, like, really gloomy and really kind of heavy. And I thought that was, like, very intentional and specifically chosen. But as I kind of saw how this show does everything, I'm thinking more and more that a lot of it is actually supposed to be kind of more like a standard anime. But just the idiosyncrasy of the director and maybe the limitations of how they wanted to depict things, it ends up being like this kind of weird, stilted, melancholy feeling. A lot of it, of course, is intentional. Like, it is intended to be a very melancholy show, for sure. But it's like really awkwardly melancholy in a way, which, I don't know, it's very endearing, but it's also like not great. Like, it has a very hard time shifting moods because of that. The best part of the show, hands down though, was the use of romantic era piano pieces as background music for a lot of scenes. They got Debussy, they got Liszt, they got Satie, they got Chopin. Why don't more anime do this? It's free. It's all in the public domain. You can just choose to put the Gymnopede instead of whatever Gymnopede ripoff you've paid some composer to make in 5 minutes. Why don't more? It's so good. It sounds so good. It just, like, melts your heart into sadness in the most beautiful way. And I think it adds so much to the show. I don't know. It's free. Hollywood figured this out. There's like 5 different classical pieces that Hollywood just spams in every single movie. Anime, I don't want it to go that far, but the selection they chose from this was great. There were some deep cuts that I really liked that like brought those pieces back to mind for me for the first time in probably years, and it was so moving and beautiful. And it was free. They didn't have to pay for it because it's all public domain and like 200 years old. Ridiculous. Every show should do this. Anyways, I had a really hard time figuring out how to score this. In some aspects, it's like a 9, like the soundtrack. And just the depth of atmosphere they're able to cultivate in some of the scenes. And then other scenes I was just so disconnected and so like confused and disappointed. Like, why are they doing this? This is not at all landing. This is not the sort of show they can do. And like technically it wasn't super great. Like some of the cuts looked really nice, but overall kind of a bland show. So overall, I'm giving it an 8. Like, it's fine, and certain qualities are good, but I can't in all good... What am I trying to say here? In good conscience? That sounds too heavy. It's not going to weigh on my conscience as if I overrate Super Cub. I'm not going to be lying up at night going, oh god, I've deceived the poor fools. Oh, it's raining, thank god. It's been so hot today. Oh, that's going to be lovely. Okay, anyways. Yeah, it's an 8. It's an 8. I'm a little disappointed with how weird it got, but a pretty interesting show. Next, we'll talk about Zombieland Saga Revenge. This is an extremely worthy sequel to a wonderfully fresh original. Even after the shock of the initial gimmick has long since passed, they're still friggin' nailing it. It builds this revenge plot. This is, I guess, minor spoilers, but we find out at the start of the series that the group is super broke, down on their luck, and they need revenge. They need to claw their way back up to the top. And I think situating it like that is just a really good driving force behind all the stories. You know, we get the ups and downs of success. This drives lore exploration. The very premise itself leads to some fundamental crises. Many follow-ups lack this sort of motivation, and they end up just kind of being more of what happened in season 1. But this show does a great job of pushing this arc, this overall goal. But even more just would have been fine. Even if they just wanted to have more of the kind of adventures of season 1. There's so much space to explore with every single character. That's the real strength of the gimmick. Not that they're zombies. Spoiler alert, they're zombies, is the point. But that they've been resurrected from all these different eras, from all these different walks of life, to contend with being an idol in the modern world, I think is such a funny premise, and a premise with so much potential to kind of dive into, you know, their lives beforehand, and what that brings to bear on their current lives, and all of the culture shock of modernity. It's fantastic. And sometimes, though, when they focus on these individuals and have kind of standalone adventures, they fall a little flat. There's a few episodes in the middle that I was just like, eh. But they had a lot of heart. And the godly cinematic production. Mappa did such a fantastic job with this, that they can go into all sorts of like cinematic mode, movie parodies, pastiches of different animation styles and stuff. And it feels coherent. It feels expert. It feels like they can do it with like a lot of confidence. But what really, really puts it over the top for me, and this is surprising, is the performance scenes where they actually are singing and dancing on stage. Idol anime as a genre doesn't usually interest me that much outside of the time that I binged watched, like, I was just a NEET. What was I supposed to do? I neated it up and I watched iCats. But generally I don't watch much Idol anime. I watched the first season of Idolmaster and the first 2 seasons of Love Live, and then I had enough. And when I do like them, usually it's in spite of the performance scenes, that I just like the characters and I like the other plots, but that when they start singing and dancing, I'm just kind of like, I tune out a little bit. But here, something about the characterization, just the mood, the feeling of climax that comes with the performances, they just hit. I don't know. I don't know what's so special about these. It's the same kind of awkward CGI dancing as every Idol anime uses, but it just hits. I cried. I'll say it. I cried during a lot of the performances. Usually the stuff around the performances will make me cry, but here, just the sheer triumph of them succeeding on stage was enough to move me to tears. Honestly, that doesn't say much. I cry all the time. Freaking everything makes me cry. Just looking at my cat, I want to cry. Oh, he's so cute. Oh, he's just lounging here. You can see him. Oh, he's just lounging and looking at the rain. Okay. So gonna be a season 3. If you've watched the end of this season, you'll know why this is a just. Is there gonna be season 3? I have no idea. I have no idea how to interpret that ending at all. But yeah, this is really good. I'm gonna give this a 9. It's just nice and solid. If it was like, if every episode had the impact of the big performances, it would be too overwhelming. They like need some of these filler episodes. So it's kind of tough for it to get any better than this. I guess just better filler episodes could have pushed this even higher, but still a really, really good show. Check it out. If you haven't watched the original, make sure to check that out. It's just hilarious. It's really well produced. It's really moving. The characters are great. Okay, next we're going to talk about Shadow's House. The show is so good. Cloverworks, say what you will about Wonder Egg, but they certainly swang for the fences. They shot for the moon. And here they've done it again. They're just going absolutely brazy with these insanely ambitious projects. This is kind of what I wanted Wonder Egg to be like. And let's not get into it too much. This is a Wonder Egg free video for the most part. We'll worry about that later. The simple and unproblematic fantasy lore, tight at the right level of mystery and revelation. Again, in contrast with Wonder Egg. All about looking for the intersection of their world and our world, trying to figure out what differs, what we can still assume, unraveling these threads of the structure that we can witness to try to figure out the structure we haven't seen yet. And I think it really employs well this concept that I thought of with Girls' Last Tour, where we can think of 4 quadrants of mystery. The characters know, but you don't know. You know, but the characters don't know, which is often a really interesting one, that you've been able to deduce something about the world, or you've seen an overlap with the real world that the characters in their limited perspective don't know about. A situation where both you and the characters know, and you might be like, why is that in the quadrants of mystery if both people know it? But it's the fact that there's doubt. It's the fact that whenever you're aligned with the characters, you start feeling the suspicion that maybe both of you are wrong. And then, of course, the situation where both you and the characters don't understand something, the truly mysterious. This is, of course, your unknown unknowns. Shoutouts to Rummy. Donald Rumsfeld, have fun in hell, you bastard. I wrote this like the day he died. And here this is kind of cool because there's an additional division between the shadows. I don't want to explain the premise. It's better to go in blind, but there's characters that are shadows and characters that are dolls. And they each have completely different worlds of knowledge. So there's almost like 8 quadrants of mystery because of that. It's super compelling. And so far, at least, all of the twists have been satisfying and not stupid. Again, in contrast with Wonder Egg. I say so far, like I watched the whole anime, but the manga goes further, quite a bit further, which I'm going to start reading. The aesthetics are really wonderful too. They really resonate with a lot of things you've already seen, with kind of expectations you have, and yet very unique as well. The absolute blackness of the shadows, I think, is such a cool idea, and it makes for such dynamic shots. Such a good blend of like these really dreamlike, unnerving, unspace type places where you don't really know where you're situated within the house anymore. But at other times, like a very, very real physicality and just kind of an exciting feeling of everything being interconnected and stuff. I'm thinking of the hedge maze, which if you've watched the show, you'll probably agree. The soundtrack is really excellent too. Again, really resonant with things that you know, kind of the standard mood of spooky, Victorian, stilted creepiness, but also just like a little experimental. Lots of really cool twists that remind me of like Virgin Babylon music, which is a big, big compliment from me. And usually this sort of spooky pseudo-Victorian stuff does not do anything for me. Like, it's not an aesthetic that I seek out, and an aesthetic that sometimes will turn me off of a property. So for me to really enjoy just living in this world to the extent that I did, it really says a lot. I got more. The characters are great. You really got to feel strongly about pretty much all the characters. That could be frustrated, that could be endeared, maybe that's charmed, maybe that's disgusted. And I think, this sort of character writing, where even though the characters are kind of moe, it doesn't seem like they're writing in service of moe or any other particular feeling, or even realism. It's not that the characters are psychologically realistic and complex in that regard. It's more just that the characters are like weird, and you want to like unravel them, and you want to kind of figure out, is their weirdness a byproduct of the setting, of some lore that we don't know about, or is their weirdness just a byproduct of them being weird as people, which is really cool to me. And then there's all these other dimensions of them, the social hierarchies, the shadow doll relationship, the gulfs of knowledge between any two given characters are all really fascinating dimensions to kind of slice across the personality, that you got to wonder, like, how does that impact the way they behave and how they treat other people. The pacing is really fantastic. First we have some nice short episodic adventures. Everything is so fresh. There's all this mysterious significance, hauntingness. You have no direction where it's going to go. I love that feeling at the end of the first episode of an anime, and I can just immediately see like 5 different directions it could go that are all super compelling and super exciting. And then when you're just getting comfortable, when you think you kind of understand the direction of the series, we get into some awesome, excellent arc writing. This kind of big arc structure that's balanced by cuts to kind of other things going on that hint at lore and stuff is really kind of my ideal form. And, here I'm thinking like One Piece. These sort of pinnacles of storytelling in shonen series and mystery series and adventure series. I think they really nail here. And this is kind of this is like a weird thing to say about an anime that I just watched and really enjoyed and praised the production of and stuff, is that this is good as a manga. I already know that I'm going to love this manga based on the structure and based on the pacing. Not that it's bad as an anime, but that in my mind, I guess there's like kind of anime structuring and manga structuring, and manga structuring has like a much higher ceiling to how powerful it can be, because you have the capability of like long arcs, because you're usually working in a weekly format like indefinitely instead of just like a chunk of episodes that are like kind of all pre-written and predetermined. But the story that kind of grows organically over time, over many, many years, I think has such huge potential for just a storytelling mode that like really compels you over years and years of your life. And Shadow's House, I think, has that potential and demonstrates that potential. And I will be reading the manga. Once my long, strange manga hiatus is over, this is definitely high on the list. And I think I talked to some friends about this show, and some of them were disappointed by there's like a big arc in the middle, and the pacing is really slow on it. And I think if you're viewing it just as like a 12-episode anime or a 13-episode anime, you're like, yeah, they spent way too long on that arc. That's fair. That's a fair criticism. But I was already kind of more thinking of it as a manga, where instead this is just something that unfolds over like a couple months of chapters or something. And I think from that perspective, it's like really, really excellent. Ending, this is where it kind of fell apart for me. The ending was like very, very rushed, and like a whole bunch of stuff just kind of is thrown at you and explained to you to kind of set up this final climax. And I heard the anime's ending is like an anime original, that it goes very, very differently in the manga. So that would explain kind of why it's weird and rushed. So again, it's like, do I knock the anime for that? I guess I should, but like, at this point I'm like more invested into the manga that I haven't read than the anime that I just finished watching. But yeah, really, really good. Really, really, really good. I think if it's going to be appealing to you, it's appealing already, and you've probably already watched it. It's certainly not a show for everyone. I'm sure just the premise and the aesthetics and stuff will turn off a lot of people, but I think it's really cool and really, really well done. A 9.5. Wow, it's getting windy out there. I see some lightning too. Dude, if my power goes out and I lose 40 minutes of recording, I'm gonna be so sad. Okay. Next, we're gonna talk about the Pretty Boy Detective Club. Buckle up. This is the great rumination of this video. It's not going to go into the insaneness of talking about Wonder Egg for an hour, but I have a lot to say about this one. Shaft is back. Nisi Oysen is back. I'm so happy, even more than any entertainment I got from watching this show. The biggest emotion I felt was the sheer joy of a new Shaft Nisi Oysen adaptation. I thought that would never, ever happen again. I had entirely given up hope. And just, it's back. There's another show like this that I hadn't seen before that came out. I had totally given up hope. Does this mean that they'll finish adapting Monogatari? Probably not. But that's okay. If they can keep making shows like this, if they can keep working together, that I'm happy. I'm overwhelmingly happy. Katie, what do you think of this wind? He's like sitting right in the path of the wind. Maybe it's nice and cool for him. This is really a good enough replacement for Monogatari. Really. I'm a kind of a die-hard Monogatari fan. I think it's a really well-done series. But this is up to par. This is honestly up to par. This is a fiendishly compelling, overwhelmingly beautiful, funny and fun, but poignant, mysterious and subtle, but obnoxious masterpiece, easily on the tier of its stylistic predecessor, the Monogatari series. But what is the Shaft style? What is the Nisi Oysen style? And why am I so happy that these two are working together again? This is actually a pretty good opportunity to find out, because it isn't a big established franchise like Monogatari. We're starting fresh here. And it's just a really excellent example of all the stuff I like about both the studio and the writer. So let's dive in. First we'll talk about the Nisi Oysen style. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name right at all. I've never heard someone say it out loud before, so I'm just guessing. But he is, usually his name is stylized in all caps, so you can be really clear that it's a palindrome, but I'm not going to do that. He's a very prolific and very successful light novel writer with several major long-running series to his name. His plots vary significantly in content, but they often share some hallmarks, like characters who are superhuman in some way, but very societally real. Socially real as well, but societally real. Kind of low fantasy stuff. It's not always supernatural. Sometimes it's just kind of more like in Dr. Stone, they describe it as like the cheat code level. We have a character that's cheat code level smart, cheat code level rich, cheat code level well-connected, to the extent that it's superhuman. But they're very situated in a very grounded, normal Japanese society otherwise. Their superhuman qualities are deeply written into their role, their relationships, their personality, and their design. The result is characters that feel like something that's unreal, like a vampire, or a ghost, or a super genius, or an infinitely rich person, but that's manifest in the realest possible way. So these characters engage in a ton of sometimes pretty inconsequential banter, just talking about whatever, back and forth, rapid fire for many minutes on end. Sometimes this also pushes you through the plot, that you're learning a whole lot about what's going on and the characters and what's happening, just through this very rapid fire dialogue. The plot unfolds in these bizarre, sudden lunges that are totally orthogonal to your expectations. It's wrong to call them twists, I think. More just that you'd go, like, what? I'm trying to think of a good example, but I don't want to spoil anything. And I'm trying to come up with one on my own, but it's really hard. Which is why this guy is such a genius in his own way. But like, I don't know. Like, what if I found out that my cat was actually, like, the elder god of the Humane Society? What if first Waterloo falls into disarray? That there's natural disasters and catastrophes, and we can't figure out why. But it turns out it's because my cat used to be enshrined in the Humane Society, and by moving him to my house, I have committed this grave religious error. Something like that. I think that's as good an example as I can come up with off the top of my head. That you suspect, I don't know, like a nuke. They set you up to suspect a nuke. They set you up to suspect foul play. But slowly you realize that the hints are pointing at the cat. Usually there's a few parallel plot lines that have some kind of thematic overlap, that kind of an unrelated lesson you learn in one plot you realize can be applied in some abstract way to another. I love this. This is one of my favorite. There's little things that feel like plot holes, things that you think maybe he forgot, little things that aren't covered up and explained by the end of the arc. But then you look through those plot holes and you realize that this is actually just the setup for a future arc. And when those pay off, it feels so good. There's this really weird, what I would call post-moral agenda of inconsequential righteousness, where because you're dealing with like supernatural type things, the characters often have some sense of justice, some sense of right, but are also self-described scumbags and freaks that are kind of also only interested in their weird, quirky interests. And everything is put on this strange post-moral relativity where stuff doesn't progress necessarily because some character feels like it's the right thing to do against the wrong thing to do, but just, this is interesting, so we're going to try to make it happen. Again, it's really hard to come up with examples that aren't spoilers, but it's just like really interesting to kind of think through, like, what are the characters' actual motivations here? And often you're left going like, oh, they just wanted to do it. Occasional, though, to kind of counterbalance this irreverence, there's very powerful moments of huge interpersonal sincerity where characters will express to each other just how much they appreciate one another and just how much their lives have been improved by their friendship. And those are really moving. Those, because you become so endeared to the characters and all their quirks, it really means a lot, and it really it moves me to tears sometimes, which again doesn't mean anything. The whole thing I would call a sublimely satisfying puzzle story. This is storytelling for storytelling nerds, people that are really fascinated by how tightly you can interweave a plot and how you can have payoffs kind of ping pong from different areas like fireworks. And it's not for everybody, but I absolutely love it. Okay, let's talk about the Shaft style. Oh, yes, I would call this the pinnacle of the light novel addictive shocking mode, where light novels are made to be kind of digested in bulk. You're meant to read them in little bursts when you have a second. They're often written in little bursts when the authors have a second. And the idea is that they just kind of keep shocking you and surprising you and intriguing you, that you'll read another chapter and another chapter. And it's not so much for like high literary value, but instead for just that satisfying feeling of always seeking the next twist. And I would say this is the pinnacle of that mode among the few light novels I've read. I think this guy just has figured out the formula. Alright, let's talk about the Shaft style. Shaft is an anime studio that has been working all the way back since 1975, but in their really famous mode, like the kind of hallmarks we'll be talking about, they've been kind of at it since 2004. This guy, Akiyuki Shinbo, who's directed many of my favorite anime of all time, has been kind of their stylistic guidance counselor. What? their influencer, the person that has been guiding them in terms of this overall consistent style of the studio. They tackle a wide variety of genres. They have lots and lots of talented staff that each puts their own personal thumbprint. Honestly, though, I thought they were dead. Like, the fucking Assault Lily. That show was so bad. And then I looked at their future prospects and it was like a desert. And, you know, they stopped adapting Sangatsu no Lion, they stopped adapting Monogatari, they stopped adapting Hidamari's Sketch. I thought it was over. Friggin' Magia Record? What the hell was that? That was terrible. But I guess they're back! I'm so happy! Oh, I'm so happy there's another proper Shaft show. And they announced the Madoka movie is finally happening, and I have hope that it'll be good. I think... Nah, yeah, Shaft can't die. Shaft can't die. But anyways, even though, yeah, there's such a variety, there's some stylistic hallmarks that they've really established. that are often memed. People often kind of make jokes about Shaft having stuff like the famous head tilt. So their biggest philosophy, I think, is to never ever do the default shot. Any depiction of the story, of the characters in the story, of the setting, shouldn't just be like, this is what's happening in reality, but you should make choices around how it's shot and how it's animated and how it's colored and how it's styled and all of that, how it's timed and edited together. That in itself should signify something above and beyond just here is what's happening in the story. This, I think, is the biggest defining aspect of how they animate versus how everybody else animates. So as an example, when characters are talking, don't just show them talking. This is kind of 101 stuff, and a lot of anime is good about this. But Shaft takes it further. Don't even just show what they're talking about, but try to establish a mood that reflects how each character thinks and sees the world, and the kind of tone of the conversation they're having. Just reflect all of that in all of these choices. Don't settle for just showing the characters talking. Don't settle for the characters just talking in front of a picture of what they're talking about. But really build this mood in every choice for each and every conversation. Incorporate this visual knowledge. Wait, I think this is supposed to go and be a circle point. Sloppiness. Anyways, maybe it's supposed to go here? I don't know. But they build this visual language of stylistic pastiche and homage that they'll reference other anime, they'll reference movies, they'll reference famous scenes and all sorts of stuff, just with these small stylistic choices that creates a visual language that it signifies a lot in the viewer that can recognize it. And even if you don't recognize it, it's so obviously iconic and so obviously kind of like a pointer that a lot of the meaning gets across anyways. Oh wait, yeah, okay. Everything takes place in an implacable dreamlike blend of imagination and reality. This varies from show to show. This is kind of on a spectrum. This is an extreme end, this in Monogatari, whereas something like Sangatsu no Lion is much, much more grounded. But even then, even in Sangatsu, where you know at least what the physical landscape of every shot basically looks like, they really enhance certain things, really exaggerate aspects of it to make it feel very dreamlike, to make it feel like kind of not just a photograph of a place, but an impressionist painting of everywhere where every scene takes place. Exaggerate everything. Exaggerate even subtlety. Exaggerate even minimalism. This might sound like an oxymoron, but if you want to have a scene that's very deadpan, make it extremely deadpan. Make it extremely flat. If you want to have a minimalist scene where it's just kind of a character in a space, like an empty white space, ruminating or something, emphasize that. Like, really drive home the starkness of that. Create a rhythm of achingly beautiful long shots and just these beautiful dreamscapes, and then really jarring silly breaks where the characters become super parody, chibi style versions of themselves for just an instant. And use this to kind of build the comedic timing and the sense of rhythm and just kind of the entire mood of the shot can be established just by the rhythm of the editing in this way. Every chance you get. Every chance you get. Switch up the style of the shot in every way you can. From sound design to color scheme to animation style to the way the characters are drawn to the perspective of the shot to the setting of the shot. Just switch it up. Every chance you can get, switch it up. And I did a little test. I picked a random episode. I went through it. I noted every single time that they changed the style of a shot to kind of emphasize something, to decide something. In a given scene where characters are talking, it happens like a dozen times. And across the episode, I counted 80 different styles. And I'm sure I missed some, or maybe I double counted some, but it's somewhere around 80. Which for a 20-minute show minus the opening and ending is like 4 times a minute. Like, isn't that insane? Every 15 seconds, they're switching up the style. That's insane. This and KyoAni to me are the absolute pinnacle of animation in my mind. KyoAni is more about the sakuga, about the actual feeling of animation, about the fluidity of movement, and the beauty of just well done animation. Whereas Shaft is about the beauty of the creativity of expression. That they're just so willing to go so hard with every single little micro shot to make it compelling and significant and different. Okay. So, as a little sampler, here's a buffet of hopefully spoiler-free shots. I hope you don't resent me for watching this later and then being like, oh, I knew that was happening because I saw the screen. But given how abstracted depiction is from story, it's kind of hard to have a shot that's a spoiler anyways. We're going to go through these pretty fast because I got a lot of them. And it's not like I dug through looking for my favorites. I just kind of skipped through the episodes randomly and just screen capped ones that I liked. But you can just see in every way they're switching it up with all of these. In the setting, and the characters, the art style. There's no feeling of contentedness, no feeling of just doing the default. Just beautiful. Oh my gosh. Just look at these. You can kind of see what I'm talking about with like the rhythmic of comedic shots and beautiful shots. You can kind of picture which would be which. All these kind of homages to other art, other animation styles. Going so hard with the mixed media. Art within art. Sudden breaks into totally different modes of animation. And then this is just still. Imagine this in motion. It's fantastic. So good. But here's the punchline. In Niseyoshi and style. He loves ending his plots with a punchline. This is a masterpiece with a caveat. This is not a show I'm recommending to everyone. This is a show that I think a lot of people watching this right now would hate. But why? What can I mean by this? Please present your theories now. This again, of course, is another... This is kind of how the series itself works, that they're always presenting theories because they're detectives. Why would I have caveats for this show that I just praise so highly and so unilaterally? What could be holding me back from giving my unqualified recommendation? Okay, well, part of it is the Niseyoshi degeneracy. Sure. Guy is a degenerate. And if you know just one thing about the Monogatari series, it's probably that it's degenerate. I'm actually curious. Let me know in the comments. Do you know about the Monogatari series? Is the one thing you know about it that it's really degenerate? This is honestly like 10 times at least less fetishy and fanservice-y than Monogatari, so don't worry too much about that. It is still a bit. You can't stop the man. he's just a pervert at heart. But it's a lot more toned down than Monogatari, so it's not really that. It's just that despite all of this lavish plays, the series it's kind of boring. In the end, though, think about it. Did I say the plot was anything besides people talking to each other? Did I ever reference or imply any sort of development that wasn't just a conversation? And there are, but the vast majority of the show is just people talking to each other, which doesn't appeal to everyone. Some people just aren't going to get engrossed by that sort of discussion-driven story. And all the stylistic elements are really disorienting and polarizing and overwhelming. Like the Shaft style, for some people, I think is like nauseating almost. That it's too much. It's too much to take in. And a lot of it is playing off your expectations of animation and subverting what you think should be the default shot and stuff. Not that that's like consciously happening, but I think it's something that the more normal anime you watch, the more just run-of-the-mill anime you've seen and have kind of imprinted into your expectations, the more interesting and impressive this becomes. Whereas I think if you're more new to anime, all of this stuff is just going to be like slamming into you like I don't know. The image I had in mind was somebody pointing a Roman candle just like right at your face, and you're just getting like pelted by fireworks. It is a show that does not care if you like it. It is not a show that meets you anywhere in your expectations and tries to cater to you. There might be fan service, but it's not fan service for everyone, that's for sure. It is something that is unlocked when you're really deep into anime. For better or worse, this is, I think, a show that you need to kind of be an otaku to really enjoy it. But don't worry, the next show is much closer to, I think, a universally appealing masterpiece. So if you try this one and it's not for you, don't worry. It's just for us. Us degens. So I debated a little while about what to give this. In terms of the excitement I felt watching it, which in large part was because I never thought I would see a show like this again. I thought Shaft as a studio had just kind of devoured itself. I thought this director wasn't working anymore. I thought they weren't going to adapt any more Niseo properties. The relief I felt in seeing a show like that after so much disappointment and after giving up hope is easily a 10. But the show itself is more like a 9.5 in that it's not as good as the best seasons of Monogatari. It's not just like perfect in the way that I would describe like Eurocamp or something. But it's still really, really, really freaking good. Okay. The last show we're going to talk about, maybe my favorite show of the season, it's really close between these last three, is Odd Taxi. And this is my, even if you don't like anime, you should watch this show of the season, probably the whole year. I always have one show that I'm watching that I reach out to my non-anime friends and be like, no, this time it's different. I'd say my success rate is like 50% maybe, that people will pick up these shows and actually like them. But it's shows where I think there's at least a chance, whereas like Pretty Boy Detective Club, I'm not telling anyone to watch that. That one's just for me. Well, me and I shouldn't say just for me. I have otaku friends, of course, too. Anyways. Yeah, this show's for everybody, though. This show, I'm going to try to get my dad to watch it. It's an intricate character drama with dozens of interwoven subplots. The studio, this is just an example of how deep it goes. The studio released official relationship diagrams to keep everyone's connections straight on the website. And even during the show, one of the characters draws a relationship diagram to make sure he's understanding what's going on. A plot that is motivated mostly by coincidence that may not be coincidence, epiphanies that might be unepiphanies. And thrown into the middle of it all is the lovable taxi driver Otakawa. He's in a very centered but incomplete competence. He's distant from us. We're not quite sure what he knows, what he thinks of the situation, what his goals are, but he's undoubtedly our hero. This has a literary appeal. And literary is a big unpleasant word that gets thrown around a lot. But there's a definition of literary that I've always really, really liked, that a professor said once in a class I was taking, that literature as a label is a promise that the work you put into analyzing it will be rewarded with meaning. That it's not shallow, but instead, the more you think about the themes, the more you think about the characterization, the more you think of kind of the poetic significance of one plot line leading to another, or one coincidence sparking something, the more meaning you find, the richer the story becomes. That literature is just a promise that your work will be rewarded. And this is a show that I think has a lot of literary appeal. Every bit of chatting, every character trait, every visual symbol, all of it has some significance for greater themes in characteristic or aesthetic or plot or moral message. Everything contributes, no matter how inconsequential. And it's the joy of figuring out why they included this or that, that's really, really satisfying. It's Pynchon-esque. Beyond literary, it's Pynchon-esque. Of course, here I'm talking about Thomas Pynchon, one of my favorite authors, who's written his most famous and acclaimed work is Gravity's Rainbow. It's pretty inaccessible. If you're curious about him, I really recommend The Crying of Lot 49. It's very short, relatively simple, but it carries a lot of the Pynchon appeal, which is kind of this giddy, infectious paranoia, this implacable tension that swells and explodes, where you don't know how things are going to connect yet, but you can start to see the threads forming. You can start to project and see, eventually this and this are going to intersect in a really terrifying way, perhaps. Well, not terrifying as in scary, but like an awesome way. I've never seen an anime that composes itself like this. It's much closer to Pinchin or, say, The Wire. I'm evoking The Wire, which, it's saying a lot. This is another big Pinchin hallmark, is the setting is very mysterious to us and is very kind of hostile to us, but has like a coziness for the characters itself. A city that knows itself and welcomes us in to this strangeness, to this implacableness, to this disorientation. There's all these little twists that are definitely guessable, but they're just guessable enough that you really feel like a genius when you figured it out. I was watching this with my anime watching club, and we would have big discussions before and after every episode with our theories of what was going to happen, what does this mean, and who did this, and I got like everything right. I'm just going to say it. From episode 1, I was calling shit that gets exposed in episode 12. It's just my genius mind at work. Nah, I shouldn't be an asshole. Everybody was right about some stuff. Everybody was wrong about some stuff. But it was in that sweet spot where you really felt like you could puzzle it out if you tried hard enough. And, sometimes you did. There's so many things I could say about this show, especially if I was willing to kind of spoil more about it. But I really think this has a lot of appeal for a lot of people. So just watch it. Just watch it. I think you'll have a great time. It's just really well done. The production's fantastic. The soundtrack's fantastic. Art design fantastic. Everything good. I'm so glad I watched it on a total whim. I was at the bottom of my list of maybe this show will be good, but it's phenomenal. And I'm really glad it's become the phenomenon that it has. Like, I think a lot of people watch this, and I'm so glad. Okay. This I would give also a 9.5. If I would say that it has a flaw, it's that it doesn't feel that much like an anime to me, really. Like the fact that the characters are animals, I think is awesome, and it just has this awesome kind of like visual to it in general. But it's pretty light on just like interesting direction or like Sakuga even. Not that I would really expect that from a show like this, but I think that's just the one thing it lacked that would like really cement it as like a perfect 10 in my mind. But yeah, really, really great show. Great, fantastic season overall. So many bangers. So many shows worth watching. Just scrolling through all my thumbnails here. So yeah, check them out. Let me know. Did you like them? Are there shows that I missed? And let's have another great season. I'll see you at the end of summer. Bye-bye.